Story 1. I used to be a chef. The number of line cooks, dishwashers, servers, and so on that I have seen completely break down and quit on the spot is staggering. I was one of them. Food service absolutely breaks people. Story 2. Veterinarians die by suicide at a higher rate than workers in most other occupations. Story 3. Social work, shelter technician roles, rescue work, veterinary medicine, and healthcare. Anything that works with needy people or animals can be absolutely brutal. So many living beings need help and compassion, but there are not enough resources to go around. Also, you see vulnerable children and animals in terrible situations, often harmed by others. Causes burnout. Story 4. The kind of job that usually breaks people is one where they are overworked, underpaid, and treated as if they are easily replaceable. It is not the career title. It is the lack of respect. Story 5. Anything involving child welfare is devastating. When your everyday reality is seeing children horribly abused and having very little power to do anything about it, you tend to break easily. My mother was a caseworker for children whose parents were going through contentious divorces. Dealing with those adults was so awful that it caused post-traumatic stress disorder and forced her into early retirement. When she started the job, her boss said he had never seen anyone last more than 5 years. Story 6. It is not the profession. Most of the time, it is the employers who break people. Story 7. Attorneys have a high rate of substance abuse and burnout. Story 8. Any job where your boss says we are a family right before scheduling you 9 days straight. Story 9. I would say anything idealized. By that, I mean the kinds of jobs people dream of pursuing. Some for the romance of it, like chef, veterinary medicine, or any work with animals, museums from my experience, law, and science. Others are make-a-difference jobs like teaching, animal rescue, law, or the military. The biggest reason is expectation versus reality. No job is as dreamy and fun as we imagine as children. Most archaeologists are not in the field. They do research. Field archaeologists often dig up trash piles, not mummies, and must catalog and store the finds, turning buckets of rocks, food scraps, and trash into results that can attract more funding. The reality is often harsh. Jobs with a lot of heart tend to put the most passionate people up against toxic or abusive managers. The cruelest people I have known have worked in nonprofits. I distrust some museum leaders because of stories about how employees are treated. I do not need to go into how the military can turn hopeful recruits into traumatized veterans. Compensation rarely keeps up with that cruelty. Many jobs are punishing, but physical danger or long hours usually come with financial benefit. Idealized jobs often pay in emotional rewards. You love it, so why do you need more money? You do it because you love it and are a good person. It is an industry problem in nonprofits and pink-collar work, but our system weaponizes passion to pay people as little as possible. Never mind the cost to mental health and, as a result, to physical health. Addiction and a high risk of suicide are physically risky. Because there is not always immediate, perceivable physical peril, companies and systems get away with not providing safeguards, regulation, or adequate compensation. There is no equivalent to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to establish a bare minimum of mental health care. For these roles, the problem is dispersed across a niche population. Poor mental health outcomes vary widely between individuals, are often easier to hide or dismiss, and appear among a small subset of highly specialized professionals. There is little visibility, and our culture is not ready to address workplace abuse and workplace trauma adequately. We already fail military veterans and teachers despite public awareness. They still struggle to have their needs recognized, and many dream industries have not reached that point. Story 10. Different people break under different circumstances. People can handle a lot of stress for a short time, but sustained, long-term stress over months or years will eventually cause anyone to reach a breaking point. Story 11. Being a nurse in an inpatient hospital or long-term care facility is not so casual. Story 12. In the Navy, I knew 7 people who committed suicide purely because of their job as nuclear operators. I served for 7 years. Story 13. I'm a security guard at a post that is very slow and boring. Most days there is little work and I am alone with minimal interaction. Many people quit because they cannot entertain themselves. It drives them crazy. The last woman quit because she had no one to talk to, which surprised me. I, however, love it. I get paid to watch YouTube and read books and not deal with people. Story 14. Going niche here. Photojournalism. Low pay. Extremely overworked. Work becomes life. Incredibly inconsistent schedule. Working until 1 a.m. One night and having an early morning assignment at 7 a.m. The next, different days off each week. Lack of a beat means covering every kind of story instead of one topic. One day you are at a carnival, the next you may be witnessing someone's lowest point. Surprisingly physically taxing. Expensive to enter and maintain due to equipment and travel costs. Often antagonized by subjects or the public. Isolating. Inconsistent schedule and varying days off make socializing difficult. And with few job openings, you often must relocate away from friends and family for work. Story 15. Local news. You are underpaid in a stressful job where you might go from a heartfelt story about a mailman to covering a man who killed his stepdaughter the next day. The culture of newsrooms is extremely toxic, and the last decade has only made it harder, with many people believing that local news reporters have a biased agenda. Story 16. Caregiving. Until you've done it, you don't get it. Endless days at home with essentially no free time. You lose yourself. Asian dramas have helped tremendously, though laughing out loud. Story 17. I believe air traffic controllers have one of the highest burnout rates of any career field in the United States. In this famously high-stress job, people do not work for long. Story 18. I am a therapist working for highly corporate treatment centers. Story 19. Almost all jobs in today's society overwork people, and most people struggle with the cost of living. Work should be at most 5 hours a day, and society should prioritize time for family. We overspend as a society, and consumer culture contributes to the inability to keep up with costs because some things are treated as needs now rather than wants. Story 20. Teaching. I mentored 2 new teachers who left abruptly within their first 2 weeks or first 2 months. I was saddened but not surprised. Story 21. Anything related to human or animal welfare, such as pet rescue, child protective services, assisted living, and senior care. Story 22. Working in food service is rough. People come to you for food so they do not go hungry, and they sometimes treat you very poorly. Working for a large insurance company was depressing when you deal with people trying to decide whether to pay their mortgage or their Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act benefits. Recently, working in information technology, there is a growing number of people who embody learned helplessness. It used to be just 1 or 2 people in an office and they were only a little annoying at worst. Now it is a daily request. Can't you just do this for me? Worse yet, management backs them up and blames the information technology team. But the worst was food service. It was not every day or every customer, but when it was bad, it was really bad. Story 23. I read a while back about the harmful psychological effect that working in the meat industry has on people. I would think any job in which you must kill something all day, every day, would take its toll quickly. Story 24. Many first responder jobs are mentally and emotionally draining. I was a dispatcher for 3 years and reached my limit taking calls from people at their worst moments. No amount of training can fully prepare you for what you will hear or see, and mental health programs are limited. This is worse for dispatchers because they are neither police nor union members, so it is harder for them to obtain assistance. On top of that, they work excessive overtime because of staffing shortages and call-offs. Story 25. Being in the Navy, I have never worked with a more broken group of people. Story 26. Emergency medical technicians and emergency responders such as firefighters, dispatchers, nurses, doctors, and police officers. Story 27. In call centers, one of my coworkers had to obtain Family and Medical Leave Act paperwork to be allowed to use the restroom between breaks and lunch. His doctor did not know how to fill out the form, since using the restroom is a normal bodily function, not a medical condition. Story 28. Everyone in healthcare or emergency services is emotionally affected. Story 29. Public transportation workers, specifically bus drivers. Several times a year people stop mid-route, tie up the bus, and walk away. I have come close a few times. It is terrible for your physical and mental health. Prolonged sitting takes a real toll on your body, and passengers can treat you very poorly, never acknowledging when you do things right and ready to criticize the smallest mistake. I found an old video from 2019, about a year before I started this job, and I could not believe how cheerful and alive I sounded. The job was never meant to be permanent. Although I have stayed much longer than I expected, it has drained me financially and emotionally, and I am getting closer every day to making a change. Story 30. Speaking as someone whose job broke them, I would say a 911 operator. Story 31. Anecdotally, I do not know a corrections officer who was not changed for the worse by the time they retired. A few switched careers before the change became too severe. Many end up bitter, withdrawn, and nasty if they do not end their careers. Story 32. I am a caseworker for the general population. I recently left a job I loved working with adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities because I am so burned out. Needs are growing, resources are decreasing, and upper management only sees clients as numbers. Story 33. An increasing number of resident physicians have died by suicide. It is easy to become disillusioned with the American healthcare system. This, along with brutal hours, low pay, and a thankless job, makes residency very difficult. Hospitals cannot run without residents, yet they are treated poorly. Story 34. Trigger warning. Suicide. I worked in a factory building industrial computers on an assembly line. At 6 months, I wanted either to hang myself from the metal scaffolding on the factory floor or to drown myself in the bathroom sink. That line of work, mechanizing people into cogs, breaks some people. The pay is not worth it. Story 35. I am an equipment engineer responsible for 50 semiconductor tools running a dozen processes. Playing trumpet professionally can be extremely demanding and can overwhelm even experienced players. I am also a stamping engineer at a first-of-a-kind factory. Story 36. I can attest to someone who worked in Child Protective Services for 11 months. It is hard work, and it takes the most dedicated people to want to be there. Story 37. A person whose job is to analyze and catalog child sexual abuse material must identify locations and victims. They must determine whether the content is previously cataloged or new. Most people remain in the job only a few years because of the mental toll. Somewhat relatedly, website content moderators must review graphic violence, child abuse, and animal abuse, but they do not receive good pay or mandatory employer-paid therapy. Story 38. All jobs in which you are exploited for a low salary are especially recognizable when the employer says, "We are a family." Story 39. Roughly 1/3 of new graduate nurses leave bedside care or the profession within 2 years of graduating. Story 40. I have known quite a few lawyers who quit to pursue other things because they hated it so much. Story 41. Childcare is the worst. Workers are underpaid, overworked, and often receive no respect from administration, parents, or society as a whole. They work 10-hour days and do not make enough to survive. Story 42. In emergency services, the average career length for a paramedic is 3 to 5 years. They work 24-hour shifts with forced overtime and low pay, so most work well over the scheduled 48 hours per week. Chronic sleep deprivation accumulates and begins disrupting hormones and brain chemistry. Add post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, and back pain, and you have a ticking time bomb. Unfortunately, it is common for people who reach pensionable age to die within a few years of retirement. I have made it 15 years so far. 5 years ago, I was a typical burned-out medic. Overweight, drinking heavily with untreated hypertension, smoking like a chimney, and emotionally vacant while working 70 hours a week. The job almost got me. I ended up hospitalized with cardiac issues. So I quit drinking, started medication, quit smoking, began exercising, and most importantly, started seeing a therapist who specializes in first responders. Being a grief mop can and will break you, but someone has to do it. Story 43. Later in life, tradesmen who never upskilled or stopped working on the tools before it was too late are the most broken, unhappy men I have ever had the pleasure of working with. Story 44. Speaking from experience. Overnight shifts in warehouse operations are difficult. Unloading and loading trailers, long hours, hard work, constantly changing start times, and a disrupted sleep schedule are by no means easy. Add poor attendance, which increases the workload for everyone who shows up. I do not think it is comparable to other careers, but I have respect for those who must work overnight shifts to get by. It really took a toll on my mental health and my sleep. Story 45. Working in a mainstream newsroom. When you are tasked with trying to grab clips from families who are experiencing extreme trauma, grief and so on and are convinced that this is somehow normal, it is not. Headlines and deadlines should never be prioritized over empathy and compassion for others. Story 46. I just left teaching. I was completely committed to it. The United States education system is deeply broken in multiple ways. A few common problems that make the job so difficult. Ever-growing class sizes. My district averages 35 students per class. An ever-increasing list of responsibilities with no pay adjustment. Consistent lack of disciplinary support. Lack of support from parents. Forced to work outside paid hours because of the massive amount of grading and planning required just to function as a teacher. I decided this year that it was no longer worth the time or effort. The most troubling part is that school districts are experts at weaponizing teachers' altruism to get more from us for nothing. The amount of guilt and shame I felt for stepping away from a job that was harming me was overwhelming. Story 47. Creative careers that involve repeated rejection can crush self-esteem. Story 48. I speak as a business owner recovering from a mental health break. Story 49. Being a social worker for Child Protective Services involves a very high turnover rate. Story 50. Emergency medical services can wear you down in many ways. If you do it long enough, you will get calls that leave a mark. Not just the trauma and death you see, but domestic and child abuse calls have given me sleepless nights. Add needlessly stressful non-emergent calls in between, along with constant physical wear and tear, and before you know it, you have burnout. Working as a first responder is a different kind of stress. You are not in the safe, controlled environment of the emergency room. You are in someone's living room, a McDonald's bathroom, or a clothing aisle at Walmart. It is not just assessing, treating, and transporting the patient. Scene management is a skill everyone must learn. On the rough calls, emotions on scene can be very raw and sometimes dangerous. Personally, I enjoyed the sometimes chaotic environment, but that will chew you up in the long term. Also, the criminally low pay, mandatory overtime, and odd long hours do not help. I lost my first partner to post-traumatic stress disorder. It was tough, but he lives on through the mentorship he gave me. Support your local healthcare workers and first responders. Stay safe, everyone. Story 51. Investment banking and big law. Honorable mentions. Consulting, medicine, and any other job with brutal hours where you barely sleep. I'm sure there are more, but these are the ones I'm familiar with. Story 52. Law enforcement officers do not leave. They are permanently crushed and broken. Story 53. Certified nursing assistants. From my own experience, if you are not meant to do it, I have watched dedicated, hardworking, caring people completely destroy their bodies and mental health to do the damn job. Story 54. I worked in a kitchen for years. They were some of the most stressful of my life. Our restaurant was on a beach in Hawaii, so it was constantly busy. I saw cooks break down into tears, chefs walk out, and servers lose their composure. The pressure sometimes led to near violence among staff. I hated going to work every day, but with children at home, I had no choice. On my days off, I would try to get quiet time and sometimes thought I could still hear the ticket machine. One day, I had enough and vowed never to work in another kitchen again. Story 55. My housemate from university worked in a slaughterhouse as a summer job. At the abattoir where he worked, there were two types of workers. Those who worked for a few weeks or months and quit because they could not handle it, and long-term employees who had been there for years and generally seemed numb to what was happening around them. Apparently, some of them drank alcohol or used drugs outside of work, which probably explained a lot. Story 56. I work at an airport as an aircraft mechanic. My job can be stressful, but two things I would never want to be are a flight attendant or a customer service agent at the gate. The sheer number of stupid people and their questions they must deal with every day must be soul-crushing. They could not pay me enough to stand at the gate answering angry, rude customers' questions about a flight delay caused by maintenance that is completely out of your control. Story 57. My dad's more than 40-year career in law enforcement ended in early retirement because of heart failure. He had been fine until he was assigned to investigate sexual crimes against minors. Story 58. My dad is a 911 dispatcher, and for 18 years I have seen him and his coworkers as partners. Story 59. A friend told me that dentists have a high suicide rate. I did not know that before. Story 60. Retail pharmacy. My colleagues are not all right, though I am fortunate to work in a hospital. Story 61. I briefly dated a woman who worked in the call center for Child Protective Services, and she was a basket case because of it. Story 62. American manufacturing conditions. Bring manufacturing back to America. Are you sure you want that to happen under a party that wants 14-year-olds to both work and marry? Have the people who say that ever worked in manufacturing? Sincerely, a former and disgusted manufacturing engineer and designer. Story 63. Management can make a positive difference if leaders genuinely care about and support their team. Most of the time, upper management and owners do not care about the general workforce and are only interested in keeping the business profitable and running. I have had two decent managers in my working life. While they tried to show a positive attitude with their team, they both seemed broken and depressed. One of them died about 5 years ago at 51 due to health issues related to alcoholism. Background: I could only do management for a few years before I opted out and said never again. I think the last straw was when they introduced new productivity standards. No one on my team was meeting them in a certain area, so I went out and worked the area myself. Even working at a steady pace without talking or interruptions and not running, I was only able to reach 89%. The minimum required was 95% to avoid disciplinary action. When my boss saw me on the floor, I told him my concerns. He looked at me strangely and said he paid me to manage people, not to do their work for them. If I had concerns with the system, I should file a ticket. But this could, in the worst case, result in someone being fired before a review occurs. In the best case, it would hurt their performance review. I tried to schedule a meeting with him to review my concerns, but he postponed it 3 Fridays in a row. I left for a new job shortly after, giving about 12 hours notice before my next scheduled shift. I emailed my resignation Sunday night after payroll cleared. I was due to start the next afternoon. Story 64. I have personally known 3 emergency medical technicians who died by suicide. Tragically, one of them was the father of a woman who had died by suicide. You must see some of the worst scenes. You are not paid much and the hours can be grueling. Major respect to all my emergency responders here. Story 65. Academia. The world of learning died a long time ago. We are just putting the pieces together. How those pieces are assembled is what breaks people. Funding is a bleak issue, with favoritism towards certain clubs but not others. The system is classist and racist. Many professors are grifting or outright falsely advertising who they are and how they conduct research compared with the experience of actually working with them. Whether due to ego or closed minds, being an outlier in your field is punished and will significantly decrease your chances of success. You cannot fail to fit in unless you are a savant, but statistically you are unlikely to be. Most candidates never earn Doctor of Philosophy degrees. It has been this way for decades. Story 66. School guidance counselor, especially in low-income or methamphetamine-affected areas. Story 67. Being a therapist or psychiatrist, you have to listen to so many people's painful lives that it makes you wonder, what is the point of human existence if life is so miserable for most people? Story 68. Porn. I do not know many people who emerged victorious from that life choice. There are some, but not many. Story 69. I worked as an officer for 8 years. I saw and heard the most vile things imaginable. The violence and extortion are beyond comprehension. An individual may receive 7 years for an assault on the street and then commit the same crime daily inside the prison with no consequence. I sifted through feces, saw men pull their intestines out, witnessed deaths due to overdose, was attacked with razors, and was exposed to unknown drugs by inmates. The list is endless. The truths of the job are ignored by decision makers, sadly. Corrections. Fixed grammar and punctuation, removed meaningless repetition, replaced ellipsis and special characters, standardized numbers to words, no acronyms found. Story 70. Nursing. Everyone knows the nurse-to-patient ratios are unacceptable, but nothing changes because hospitals are so greedy. I loved being an intensive care unit nurse, but being given 3 patients instead of 1 or 2 when they are in such critical condition is dangerous and puts immense pressure on you. You are supposed to have 1 or 2 patients because you need to be detail-oriented and able to catch small changes. With more than that, mistakes happen, and that can cost someone their life. It is avoidable, but the higher-ups would rather get a bigger paycheck than hire more nurses. What's especially sickening is that at the last hospital I worked at we had the equipment and staffing for safe ratios, yet they would not return to normal intensive care unit ratios. Nurses were literally called off or sent home instead of allowing everyone to have a safe assignment. Story 71. The average turnover for hospice nurses is 6 months. Story 72. Work at a veterinary clinic in any capacity, sometimes at an animal shelter. Story 73. Social services caseworker absolutely broke me in only 5.5 years. Story 74. It is strange that I had to scroll down a couple of pages and still did not see anyone mention police officers. Story 75. First responders have a relatively high suicide rate. The disturbing things they see and never process contribute significantly. Dealing with many non-emergency calls also causes burnout. They may dismiss something that seems minor but is actually serious, leaving them at a disadvantage during an emergency. When they leave the profession, they often lose their support network. I work at a fire department and had 2 coworkers die by suicide within 5 years of each other. I am now a full-time paramedic and have experienced at least 1 known suicide since I have been in this job. Story 76. Anything that contradicts your values and sense of purpose will eventually break you. Story 77. Call center work. Their turnover rate is insane, but it's genuinely a job that grinds you down. You are expected to give 100% on every call, you are graded on the tiniest of things, given unrealistic goals for small bonuses, subject to the whims of the market, and worst of all, you have to deal with some of the worst people whom you are often not allowed to hang up on or must agree with. Some highlights for me were the man who called our scheduling department to ask about open jobs for installers, then went on a 10-minute conspiratorial rant about Mexicans, and became angry when I kept interrupting him to remind him that calls are recorded and reviewed by various parties in the company. The woman who willingly gave me her full social security number without any prompting. 2 points about that. First, if someone calls you asking for information, do not give them anything. Ask for their company name, find them online, and call back so you know who you are talking to. Yes, even if you have their number saved on your phone, because numbers can be spoofed. Second, never give out your full social security number without being absolutely certain who will have access to that information. The woman with dementia for whom I was forced to set an appointment even after realizing she could not make rational decisions, because I was told I would be written up if I closed the lead without trying. Numerous callers who call to complain, launch into an explanation, yell or get angry if you try to interrupt, rant for 20 minutes before asking what you want, and then become upset when you tell them the reason you wanted to interrupt was to transfer them to customer service. Story 78. It's not chefs or teachers. It's police officers. Depression, alcoholism, divorce. The job is to purposefully pursue the worst of the world. It changes people. I've seen it. Story 79. The creative arts. There is only so much new that can be created. Artists take up unconventional lifestyles that do not always go hand in hand with financial security. They are prone to abusing freedom of expression. The disciplined ones retire. Story 80. Any job becomes more bearable when you live in a society with safety nets. American society is harsh for almost everyone. Speaking as an American. Story 81. Pharmacy and pharmaceutical research both have high burnout rates. Story 82. Serving gives you real nightmares. Story 83. Cement from the factory is in the air, causes cancer, and causes all your teeth to fall out. Story 84. I work in medicine. Everyone I work with is trying to leave as early as possible despite the high pay. Story 85. I only discovered the high suicide rate among dentists when I started applying to dental school. Story 86. I work on anything involving cars. I do aftermarket 12-volt systems, and many people look down on me because they consider it a kid's job. Everyone knows a cousin down the road who can do it for less, and they can buy parts online for lower prices than I can sell them. The industry is dying on its own now, so that is nice to be a part of. Story 87. Quality assurance. Gaslighting is always involved, whether you like it or not. Story 88. Retail pharmacists are quite unhappy these days, despite high pay. They must work very quickly, counting and verifying prescriptions for corporate managers they never meet, and often deal with impatient or unhappy customers. The Doctor of Pharmacy degree is a large investment of time, effort, and money, only to result in retail work serving the general public. Story 89. Working in technical support will make you hate humanity for eternity. Story 90. Retail. People and their pretentious bullshit can fuck off. Story 91. The locations department in the film and television industry. Story 92. Teachers. I have been teaching for 25 years, and the number of people I have seen quit after a few years is eye-opening, considering how much they paid for their college or teaching degree. It is getting worse. New teachers come in excited to get the high school students reading and writing, but the students do not have the mental stamina for either. Why read a novel when you can use artificial intelligence to get a chapter-by-chapter summary? Why bother writing to explore thoughts when you can type a prompt asking for a 14-line poem about how much you love your cat MS? Misty, including similes, metaphors, enjambment, and how you got her as a kitten, and paste it into the chat generative pre-trained transformer? Story 93. After my house job, I vowed never to be part of the system. I hated who I was becoming and how indifferent I had become. I am now training to become a pathologist. Story 94. I came here for the food service staff. 30 minutes for a shrimp scampi. 83 all day. Story 95. Internal audit broke me. I changed professions a few years ago and never looked back. Story 96. Retail and fast food management. Constant stress and no control. Story 97. Why are we responding to a 0-day-old bot account? The original poster is a loser engaged in karma farming. Story 98. When I was younger, I worked as a certified nursing assistant and caregiver for an elderly woman. She lived alone with a dog. Her husband had died about 5 years earlier, and she often shared stories about him, how proud she was of their life together and his career. She was incredibly sweet and kind, treating me like her own daughter. She even tried to give me her old car, which was very thoughtful. I respectfully declined because she had children and I did not want to complicate things. For several months I took care of her, including cooking, cleaning, bathing her, and accompanying her to appointments. One day her son decided he wanted me gone so he could move in and care for her himself. It was heartbreaking. Her condition worsened, and she continued to reach out to me after I left. I visited her as much as I could, but she passed away just weeks after I was let go. I caught a glimpse of the hardships of growing old. People can become powerless, and those closest to them may not always have their best interests at heart. I changed jobs, but to this day I still think of her and carry her memory with me. Story 99. Teachers are not doing life or death work, but the constant stimulation and stress of working with many students is challenging. Story 100. Information technology. Not everyone stays. The amount of complaining I hear from people who break their own equipment, refuse to listen when I explain how to avoid repeating the mistake, or simply expect me to work magic is unreal. Story 101. Construction health and safety is a job that looks straightforward from the outside, but it breaks a lot of people. You are working in a high-risk, fast-moving environment that changes every day. You deal with multiple trades, sometimes extreme weather, tight timelines, pressure from management, and, most challenging of all, human behavior. Substance abuse is extremely common both on site and at home, and you end up carrying the emotional weight of trying to keep people safe who may not want to be told what to do. It is not easy to tell experienced workers to change the way they work, use personal protective equipment, or follow safe practices when they have been doing things their way for decades. Story 102. It depends on whether you have untreated mental illness. I have bipolar I disorder and I had a breakdown at an Amazon warehouse. I experienced psychosis when I became infatuated with a coworker. I spoke with him, got his number, and went on a couple of dates. It is not the job. It is the illness. Story 103. Despite a six-figure salary, you do not want to be an air traffic controller. Story 104. The United States Postal Service is no longer a lifelong job. They are turning over employees at an unsustainable rate. Tip your mail carrier. Story 105. Most hairdressers I know, myself included, are on the verge of a breakdown. We are caretakers expected to provide therapy and create art, all while earning below the poverty line and destroying our bodies. Story 106. Telemarketing. Customer service representative. Anything where you are the main contact point, read as punching bag, for some other department that oversold and underdelivered. Story 107. I am admittedly biased because I used to be a teacher, but I know many people who left that profession, especially after the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. I am not sure I would go so far as to say it usually breaks people, but I know many who were fundamentally unhappy in that profession. Story 108. When I was in nursing school, my professor told us the average bedside nurse leaves direct patient care after 5 years. Thankfully, nursing offers many other job options. Story 109. I am a speech-language pathologist. The things you see in public schools include abused children, children who are nonverbal and cannot communicate, children with intelligence quotients between 40 and 60, parents who drop their child off and expect staff to babysit, but then become upset because their child cannot tell them when they need to use the bathroom and the parent does not follow the recommendations you give. High caseloads with long hours of unpaid work, and spending your own money on toys and supplies just to have what you need to help the children. I would not recommend this career to anyone. Story 110. Nursing is driven by passion, but you may encounter one difficult patient after another and experience abuse. All of this happens with the expectation that you will provide professional care without fighting back. Story 111. This seems almost trivial compared to other examples, but creative jobs such as book publishing are so romanticized that companies take advantage of that with very low pay, huge workloads, and long hours. Retention does not matter because there are literally 1,000 people who would be happy to take your job in a heartbeat. There was a mass exodus in 2022, and every year more people leave the industry altogether because of burnout. It is particularly bad in junior-level positions, especially editorial. This job and my previous nonprofit job had eerily similar messaging. Companies tell you they are here because they love the work, not for the money. Nearly 4 years into publishing, I am only now earning more than I did in my nonprofit job. Keeping in mind that most publishing jobs in the United States are in New York City, it is pretty bleak. Story 112. The film industry can be harsh. Creative fields attract many egomaniacs who treat you as less than human for their own benefit. If you are not careful in how you handle them, they can cause you to lose work because of who they know. Their words can outweigh your situation. Abuse is common in this industry, and instead of fighting it, people often accept it and hope the project passes quickly. There is also a lack of respect regarding compensation. Some producers will gladly pay half your rate for double the work. Sometimes you will be on a long-term gig, such as a feature film or television show, where you must be around those people for months or even years. Story 113. I can't access external web pages. Please paste the article text here and I will correct spelling, expand acronyms to their full forms, remove meaningless repetition and special characters, fix punctuation, and output a version optimized for Azure text-to-speech. If you want acronyms handled a specific way, expand once with the acronym in parentheses or replace entirely, Say so. Story 114. Lots of doctors burn out. Not even far into their careers, many experience their first of multiple burnouts during residency. Several colleagues had high aspirations to continue training towards some higher-end goal, but by the end of residency they were ready to start working. Once you get into what feels like the final job, almost 1 year and many colleagues were already considering what it would take to retire early. Conversations about the back office quickly became almost constant. Investment strategy, money matters, and so on. It is not all talk. In many hospitals, most doctors are in their 30s and 40s, with only a few older than 55. Don't get me wrong, it is a good job. I feel content with a solid day's work, the pay is great, and the job security is strong. That said, it is more stressful than people think, and burnout is very common. The reason you probably do not see as many older, curmudgeonly doctors is that the pay is often high enough to let them leave when they have had enough, unlike in many other industries. Story 115. Production work in factories that involves doing the same tasks for hours at a time will damage your body and mind. Story 116. I worked at the United States Postal Service for 12 years. It broke me. Story 117. I have worked as a croupier for the past 12.5 years. The job has broken me several times, but the money is too good and I love my job. Story 118. Automotive mechanic. The flat rate system is terrible. Never knowing what your paycheck will be at the end of the week, being at the mercy of your service writer for work and of the engineers who design vehicles for ease of repair or cost and complexity, working outdoors and in extremely hot engine bays, and exposure to carcinogens make the job difficult. On top of that, you must get on the floor every time a vehicle goes on its lift, and you need to spend $8,000 to $15,000 on tools just to do the job. It is no surprise people leave the industry in droves. Even my high school shop teacher left and went into real estate. Story 119. The Trump press secretary. Things never end well for the mouth of Sauron. Story 120. A 7 days a week, 21-day variance job at General Mills. Great if your back is against the wall, though. Saved $10,000 in probably less than 4 months due to forced overtime 3 to 4 days a week. Story 121. Trucking requires a certain kind of person to do it long-term. Story 122. A touring stagehand experiences a sharp divide between the happy warriors on great tours and the people actively avoiding their home situation. There are ample opportunities to ruin your life on tour if you are so inclined. Story 123. Many people cannot handle being a stay-at-home parent. They crack. Story 124. I worked in the restaurant industry while trying to take off in my actual career. I was a bar manager, kitchen manager, head chef, and bartender at the same restaurant over a span of a few years. That broke me. I was dead inside for more than a year after I quit. Now I am a marketing manager and very happy. Story 125. In academia, smart people often become bitter and fight over the smallest stakes. Story 126. Do not work at a gas station or convenience store. Trust me. Story 127. 911 dispatching involves callers experiencing their worst moments and others who are brutally entitled and unaware, calling about inconveniences. You have callers screaming at you about a traffic delay while you are trying to find next-of-kin information for a driver involved in the collision. You send first responders to horrific scenes and hope for the health and safety of everyone involved. Compassion fatigue is very real. Story 128. Teaching. In my experience, people, often men, just walk off. Story 129. Trucking. Most people give up within 6 months. Those who stay become trapped. The pay is good only if you have 2 or more years of experience, which does not help new drivers. This job will definitely break you mentally and physically. During holidays, you may shut down at a truck stop while your family and friends get together. I would not wish that feeling on anyone. Food options for drivers are horrible, and drivers get little respect from others. In most cases, we have to pay for parking. Showers are hit or miss. They are either clean or severely run down. Laundry costs $10 to $15 depending on load size. We sleep and live in a moving jail cell. Some people say, "Why do you not work out?" I do a few homemade workouts, but that is all I can do. You can risk going to the gym, but there is about a 50% chance your truck will be booted or towed. A booting company will charge around $400 to $1,000 to remove the boot. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.